But then he granted us immediate absolution. He said, it's because we never thought we'd have to. Whoever thought, for example, the solution to crime was defunding police or not arresting people shoplifting? Whoever thought we'd have to defend the basic benefit of a nuclear family? Whoever thought we would have to push back on educators who want to give our children gender-blocking drugs without telling their parents? Whoever thought these children's hospitals that saved my daughter's life as an infant, with open heart surgery, rebaffled the upper chamber of her heart. Her heart operates backwards today. She's 4 years old, has 2 children. Whoever thought those children's hospitals would be mutilating minors? Again, we all think this is crazy. The left doesn't. And the left is backed up because the masterstroke of the left was taking over our university systems, right? Back in the 60s during the Vietnam War protests. They have the power to make it very difficult to prove them.
Information. Good afternoon.
Cameron Schulte.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. Happy to have everybody joining us for lunch. I am honored to introduce this afternoon's first speaker. As a Wisconsinite, I could not be more proud to have the next speaker be my United States Senator. He has, since 2010, been a crusader for good government, lower taxes, and has an incredible ability to slay the left's golden calves. Whether it is COVID, whether it is the consensus, as it were, on COVID, or whether it is Russian hoaxes, Senator Johnson has done yeoman's work on shining a white-hot light on the misinformation, as it were, from the left. In 2010, when he was first elected, he beat United States Senator Russ Feingold, and just this past fall, he was reelected to his 3rd term, and as a Wisconsinite myself, I am looking forward to the next 6 years. Please welcome to the stage U.S. Senator Ron Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction and warm welcome. I want to thank the Heartland Institute for inviting me, to Jim and James and Steve, a fellow Wisconsinite. I looked at your program, and it's always a little intimidating when you're giving speeches to these types of seminars, and you've got a whole long list of eminently qualified experts in fields that you're not expert in. And so I was kind of scratching my head going, okay, so no, what am I going to talk about? I'll have to thread that needle, but what I'll try and do is I'll try and provide you my perspective on the topic of climate change. I have noticed, again, going through your presentations here, you've already talked about, or you've had presentations on climate change. You've had presentations on ESG. You've had presentations and discussions on the Great Reset. So just by going through that, I can already tell that you know what's up here. This isn't about climate. This isn't about saving the planet. This is about the left utilizing climate change to create a state of fear to control our lives. That's what this is all about. Because you have to probably realize, as a U.S. Senator, I'm probably the most ridiculed United States Senator, particularly on climate. When I first ran in 2010, I was asked about climate change, and I actually read books, and they were asking me, "Do you believe in man-made climate change?" And listen, I realize mankind definitely affects and impacts the environment. To the extent we might impact climate change, I'm somewhat skeptical. And I made the statement at that point in time, I think it's probably more whatever is happening to the climate due to solar activity, sunspots. And so I became dubbed Senator Sunspot. And it's not a term of endearment, trust me. It's a term of derision. But again, I've got a brain. I'm naturally skeptical. And by the way, to me, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Anytime I hear people talking about settled science, to me, if there's one word that would define science, it would be skepticism. Right? Taking a look at the world and go, why is that like that? Is that really the explanation? So skepticism is extremely important, but I'm a skeptic because of all of the past predictions of all the Malthusians, all the doomsayers, right? I won't go through all of them because the list is long. What city is going to be covered up by the oceans? When we're going to lose the polar ice caps? I mean, all these predictions. Now, I'm old enough to have been told that we had to worry about global cooling. Then there's global warming. And then with that, let's call it climate change because that's, a grab bag of everything. So, I mean, just those wrong predictions ought to open people's minds to the possibility that maybe these people are wrong. And of course, I think we all believe that they are wrong. But there's a couple of data points that I've really honed in on that I don't think that the wider public generally is aware. I'll start with the Vostok ice core sample. 400-some thousand years of history there in terms of temperature. I think 4, can't really call them cycles, but peak to trough temperature variations close to 23 degrees Fahrenheit. The Greenland ice core sample, about 20,000 years, I think 6.7 degrees temperature variation. And when you see these hockey sticks, and again, you can do almost anything with a chart and a graph and statistics. These little hockey sticks, I mean, out of a chart, in terms of those temperature variations, we're talking about an itty-bitty little speck there. It's not something I'm going to lose sleep over. So I basically tell the public, I'm not a climate change denier. I'm just not a climate change alarmist. Okay? One that it always surprises people, I'll ask you, whether you probably do know the answer, but anybody know, since that last glaciation period, about 20,000 years ago, do you know how much the sea level has increased in the Bay of San Francisco? Just, think about it. Don't shout it out loud because you don't want to embarrass yourself. It's not a couple inches, it's not a couple feet, it's 390 feet. So again, just on those 3 data points, as human beings, there were men and women back then, but not enough building campfires to create global warming to cause half-mile thick glaciers to retreat from my state. So again, just common sense tells you that as mankind, I don't think there's much we can do to hold back the tides. Climate has always changed, it always will, and what we ought to do is adapt. I'm a big adherent to Bjorn Lomborg, who, by the way, does believe in man-made climate change. He just takes a very sensible approach, recognizing that we have limited resources. And so with limited resources, the last thing you really ought to do is spend money on something that you can't do anything about. So he says we shouldn't spend a dime on climate change, and I agree with that. And I have to admit, just so you understand my background, I'm an accountant. Ran a manufacturing plant for about 30 years, never involved in politics till Obamacare, and we were $14 trillion in debt. But one of the first events I attended thinking about running for Senate, this was March in 2010. There was a event put on by Americans for Prosperity in Wisconsin Dells. And one of the speakers was Lord Monckton. And you understand what Lord Monckton said. I've repeated that, but not out loud. I did this in front of a group of Republican women in Wisconsin, and somebody asked me about climate change. I said, well, I kind of take the Lord Monckton approach. I think climate change is, and did the exact same thing there. They recorded it, and CNN read my lips, and that was a news story for a couple of weeks. So anyway, you understand my skepticism here, right? Now, that'd all be well and good. If one side was just freaked out about this, they're all alarmed about climate change, there's a group of us saying, don't worry about it, we'll adapt, we'll get by. But it's way more than that, because the group that is alarmed by climate change has an awful lot of power, and they're using that power in very destructive ways. I think one of the, Bjorn Lomborg's writing for the Wall Street Journal, one of his earlier columns, they had a picture of a little boy living in squalor. And the headline was, "This young man doesn't need a solar panel. He needs electricity. He needs a better life." So, unfortunately, you've got the other side that continue to proclaim that climate change is the greatest threat to mankind or to America. I think the theme of my talk here today is that that's not true. The greatest threat, at least to America, and I would say also to mankind, is radical leftism. And there's so many ways to prove that, but one of my starting points would be just to have you contemplate Venezuela, an oil-rich nation, a highly successful nation, probably the most prosperous nation in South America until Hugo Chavez. And what you all need to understand is that Venezuelans, it wasn't some outside force, it was the citizens of Venezuela that voted themselves into poverty. And we are going down that exact same path today, and that is what we're trying to turn away from. I can understand, leftism, socialism, communism has been around for more than a century now. And I can understand back in the 30s, during the Depression. There is no perfect economic model. And let's face it, capitalism right there looked like it had taken a pretty bad turn. And so I can understand people back then embracing things like Marxism, saying we got to try something else, okay? And of course, Marxism, socialism all sounds so good, right? Equal opportunity, equality for all. The problem is it didn't work. And we've seen example after example, the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Venezuela. We've seen communism, socialism turn into totalitarianism. We've seen the deaths of tens of millions of people as a result of it. So again, having a brain, looking at evidence, you take a look at that and go, well, okay, I understand why somebody tried it, but let's not continue trying it, because it will never work. And one of the advantages of being a United States Senator is you do meet some really interesting people, very capable people, brilliant people. One of those individuals at a similar type of event like this was David Horowitz. I was invited to speak at his event. I got to spend a couple hours with him. And if you haven't read about David Horowitz or things he's written, please do. He's a brilliant mind. But his parents were communists. He was a communist until his group of fellow travelers murdered somebody, then he saw the light. And so again, I'm kind of asking him this question. So obviously socialism doesn't work, communism doesn't work. What are these people thinking? You know, I know they're not stupid. What's the deal here? He said, yeah, no, Ron, when they look at Stalin or Castro or Chavez or Maduro, they're thinking in their own minds, because they're utopians. They're thinking in their own minds, well, I'm just a lot smarter than the people who've tried this in the past. I'm a better angel. So give me all this power, and again, literally, we'll create heaven on earth. That's their mindset. We need to understand that about these people. So what unifies the left is power. Everything they do is that quest for control over lives. I mean, as conservatives, we don't get that. Now, I think it's complicated enough running my own life, trying to take care of my own family, improving their life. But that's not the mindset of a leftist. Now, all of us, I did appreciate Governor Sanders' response to the State of the Union when she was talking about, this is just crazy what they're doing, right? I mean, you're here, you're thinking all these things are just crazy. But when they're in power, they implement this craziness. I mean, I call this the list of horribles. You know, Biden, who Obama's defense secretary said is wrong on every major foreign policy decision in the last 40 years, and now he's president. So he has the embarrassing and dangerous surrender in Afghanistan, which has emboldened Putin and Xi, the Ayatollahs, the madman in North Korea. Very dangerous when you exhibit the kind of weakness. I mean, it's a disaster. I mean, leftism doesn't work. Take a look at what they are doing on the border. You know, obviously, if you're going to have a sovereign nation, you need a secure border. And they're completely ignoring the human depredations, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the drug trafficking of an open border, but they maintain an open border. You know, it's not real difficult to understand what causes inflation. It's too many dollars chasing too few goods. So what have they been doing? They've been printing dollars, trillions of them. Then they wonder why we have inflation. Look at crime. I mean, who would think that the solution to crime is to defund police or basically say that we're not going to prosecute anybody who's shoplifting over, unless it's over $1,000? You get a lot of people shoplifting $900 worth. So again, we're conservatives. We look at this as crazy, but they have power. And that's what's so destructive about what they've tried to do with climate change. But I think another one of my main points here is climate change was just a test case. It's just one example. What I want to spend a little time on is talking about what they really looked at as an enormous, once-in-a-generation opportunity, and that's the pandemic. Okay? Have you noticed that the response to the pandemic was a miserable failure? I mean, have you noticed that? I mean, by their own data, and by the way, they're not being honest, they're not being transparent, so you got to take this with a grain of salt, but by their own data, over 1 million Americans lost their lives due to COVID. Over 6 million people globally. The shutdowns didn't work. The masks didn't work. I think the most egregious offense in this whole process is not only did they not treat COVID patients, they sabotaged early treatment. And by the way, there was I always call it a cornucopia. It's not quite that many. There were many drugs that could have been used off-label as well as on-label, cheap, safe, effective, generic drugs. They just weren't allowed. I mean, what other medical condition don't we say that early diagnosis allows for early treatment, which produces better outcomes? So we always try and do. I mean, we try and detect cancer. We do try and do that across the board, but not for COVID. With COVID, we said, we're going to spend tens of billions of dollars on tests to try and flatten the curve, which of course it didn't do, but we didn't stop testing. Again, it didn't work, but it didn't stop it. But it was all about flattening the curve so that they could control our economy. So it was completely crazy what they did. They're not being held accountable for it. And I think one of the things that I've really gotten involved in is not only pushing early treatment, but because of my advocacy for early treatment, because I was opposed to the shutdowns very early on, I was very early connected with a global network of eminently qualified doctors and medical researchers. Now, I'm not a doctor, but have I gotten a medical education over the last couple of years? These are individuals, again, early on, where I became so skeptical early on is when these doctors coming out of New York, they were doing videos of themselves and they were posting them and said, this is not what you normally see with normal type of pneumonia. This is something different. And they're trying different things, and those videos were being pulled off the internet. A couple doctors in California talking about they were treating a lot of patients who think COVID was a lot more prevalent. That video was taken down. The doctors that I had testified before my committees have been vilified. They've been terminated. They've been sued. They've had their hospital privileges revoked. Why is that? So, all those things didn't make sense to me. I cannot tell you exactly what has happened here, but it's made me highly skeptical. But because I was connected to that group of doctors, I was fortunate to talk to, and I want to talk about one in particular, a gentleman called Dr. Michael Yeadon. Have you heard it? Okay. So just for those who haven't, 30 years he worked for Pfizer. His last assignment was Senior Vice President of Research. His specialty is in toxicology. He left Pfizer and started his own biologic companies, did things in partnership with Pfizer for 10 years. So again, he wasn't anti-Pfizer, he wasn't anti-vaccine, he's not anti-pharmaceutical. But when he heard what his colleagues were designing in terms of this vaccine, he couldn't believe it. He's literally beside himself. One of my first conversations with him, he said, Ron, I know what they know. I was educated with these people, the health ministers, the people in these research centers, the heads of the pharma companies. I know what they know. I know they're lying to us. I know they know they're lying to us. He said, Ron, there's a long list of ingredients we don't put in vaccines because they're toxic to the body. So when he found out what the vaccine does, it actually causes the body to produce its own toxin, the spike protein. That's why COVID is a nasty disease. It's that spike protein. That's the toxic part of the virus. He simply couldn't believe it. So he didn't believe it. But he did his research and he realized, no, that's exactly what they were going to do. And so Michael Yeadon published, and go on the internet and just go take the lies of COVID. He's got a long list. But from my standpoint, some of the more important ones, remember they told us it was all going to be staying right in the old arm muscle there, right? Produce a little spike protein there, your body's going to produce antibodies, then it's going to be safe, it's going to be effective, right? They knew that wouldn't happen, by the way, because they packaged it in something called a lipid nanoparticle, which is designed to permeate difficult to permeate barriers, like the blood-brain barrier, like the placental barrier. So, by the way, they did a biodistribution test study on that lipid nanoparticle. They didn't release it to the public. Japanese regulators had FOIA requests to get that information, but then now we have it. The lipid nanoparticle distributed all over the body. It concentrates in things like the ovaries and the testes. It can penetrate the blood-brain barrier. So they knew that ahead of time, and yet they lied to us and said it was going to stay in the arm muscle. It's also important to know and I apologize, I don't mean to scare people because I know a lot of people here are probably vaccinated. But I'm talking about this because I'm trying to warn people. You need to have informed consent. But the messenger RNA, what it does is not only does it enter the cell and ask that cell to produce a toxin to the body, which, by the way, then the body attacks, which is why you get myocarditis, why you get inflammation. But it also juices the mitochondria, the engine of the cell. Gee, what might happen if that lands on a cancer cell? So I won't go any further, but I knew this talking to Michael Yeadon back in October, November of 2020, before the vaccine ever got its EUA, its emergency use authorization. And so I tried in my limited way, because I'm not a doctor, I tried to warn the American public to just be cautious. I tried to warn government officials. I mean, Gert Van den Bosch was warning the public, warn the WHO, the 4-page letter, do not mass vaccinate into the midst of a pandemic. You'll drive variants. You could have antibody-dependent enhancements. Against all kinds of things that we didn't know. And maybe of all that I've learned in this process with these doctors and medical research is I've learned how little we do know. I mean, it's amazing what we know. It really is. It's amazing how far science has progressed, whether it's in climate or meteorology or medical science. It's amazing what we know today. But I would argue we still know a lot less, a whole lot less. We don't know versus what we do. So as human beings, as government officials, we got to have a little modesty. We're making decisions and we're taking people's freedom away. And that's really kind of my main points. The main reason I ran, freedom. It has been depressing to see how many of our fellow citizens have just willingly and are willingly giving up their freedom for this false sense of security, whether it's on climate change, whether it's on the pandemic. One thing when I talk to young people, it's my main message is please understand how crucial freedom is to this experiment we call America. Understand how crucial freedom is to your ability to live a good life, to embrace and exercise those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We just simply aren't aware of that to the extent we should. So I did want to take some questions. I think I have some time, here. But let me end on this note. One of the reasons I ran again, the primary reason, is because nobody else was advocating for the vaccine injured. So I'm talking to you about this, okay? On VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, the last numbers I have, 34,478 deaths worldwide reported on VAERS. Over 1.5 million adverse events. Now, two problems with VAERS: it doesn't prove causation, but it generally dramatically understates the number of adverse events. So you have to multiply that by some factor. There have been studies, only 1% are reported, 10%, we don't know. In terms of causation, of the 34,478 deaths, 8,685, or 25%, a quarter of them are occurring on either the day of vaccination or the first or second day after. Now, it may not prove causation, but it'd be something I'm concerned about. I can't quite explain why our federal health officials, why they're not concerned about it. But they better get concerned about it. And this is, again, one of the main reasons I'm doing. I've advocated for the vaccine injured. I've tried to comfort a father who lost his only son within days. There's no denying it. We need to recognize it, and what's so tragic about it is until the establishment, the medical establishment, does recognize vaccine injuries, until our federal health agencies do, these people can't get help. So many of the neurological issues are occurring with women. So you know what doctors do when a woman comes in with neurological problems, inner vibrations. Say it's all in your head. Some of them actually try and commit them. There's an unfortunate level of suicide within these women and men. So these people need help. It's up to us to try and help them. So we need to recognize, again, talk about the Great Reset, I won't go into a great deal, but the WHO is obviously captured by the Chinese Communist government. 3 years ago, if you would have talked to me about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, I would have said, well, why don't you go over there in the corner and talk to those folks over there? No more. These guys are, it's all on videotape. You're not going to hack in the human body. Just have to have some kind of, maybe a pandemic will allow us to have a universal vaccination program. They've laid it all out there. They've done the simulations. It's pretty obvious. We need to recognize that what they're saying is what they believe and what they're going to implement. And the censorship has been profound. The Trusted News Network. Again, it's an assault on our freedom. Driving over here, I was listening to Jordan Peterson. Whether you're familiar with him or not, recommend listening to some of the things. He came to our Senate lunch. They never get a great deal of time to talk, but one of the things that really resonated with me, he said, as conservatives, we're awful at defending our values. But then he granted us immediate absolution. He said, it's because we never thought we'd have to. Whoever thought, for example, the solution to crime was defunding police or not arresting people shoplifting? Whoever thought we'd have to defend the basic benefit of a nuclear family? Whoever thought we would have to push back on educators who want to give our children gender-blocking drugs without telling their parents? Whoever thought these children's hospitals that saved my daughter's life as an infant, with open heart surgery, rebaffled the upper chamber of her heart. Her heart operates backwards today. She's 4 years old, has 2 children. Whoever thought those children's hospitals would be mutilating minors? Again, we all think this is crazy. The left doesn't. And the left is backed up because the masterstroke of the left was taking over our university systems, right? Back in the 60s, during the Vietnam War protests, I remember it well. So when you control our university system, you control education departments, our journalism schools, our law schools, you control our culture. And it's all coming to fruition. So they can control the narrative. On COVID, I call it the COVID cartel. The administration, the health agencies who've been thoroughly captured by Big Pharma, and Big Pharma has also captured the media through their ads, and big tech social media giants. There it is. There's the COVID cartel. They're the ones that sabotage early treatment, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths that didn't have to occur. These people they will never admit they're wrong. And the body count is so high, they can't afford to be proven wrong. But here's the problem. They have the power to make it very difficult to prove them wrong. So what we are all engaged in our own individual ways is a fight for freedom. It's the essential ingredient in this experiment that is so rare and precious in human history. It's a fight for freedom. It's not somebody else's fight, it's our fight. It is a fight that we absolutely must win. So thank you, Heartland. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged in that fight. Never give up. Keep on fighting. We got time for questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. So we do have time for questions, so.
We do. We have about 15 minutes for questions, so you know how long the Inquisition will be, so that's good to know going in. If you have a question, please raise your hand. A microphone will find you. We request that you stand up, you identify yourself so that the senator knows to whom he is speaking, and we will start right here.
Welcome, Senator Johnson. Terrific speech. My name is Joe Armendariz, and there's a lot of scientists in this room. there's also a couple of political scientists, I think, in this room. And so my question for you really has to do with the political science of the day. I was reading in Politico this morning that you attended the Ron DeSantis event in Palm Beach last night. And I know that you said that you're not going to make an endorsement, but I'm wondering if you would answer a hypothetical question for me.
Probably not, but go ahead.
Which is, would you ever consider joining a presidential ticket? Because I'll tell you, Senator, in all seriousness, there aren't many Republicans who talk like you do. I mean, there just really isn't.
So let me answer it this way, okay? I think it's pretty widely known that I did not want to run for a third term. I mean, I think Lauren will definitely back me up on this. The level of dysfunction in Washington, D.C. is just profound. And for an accountant, for a business guy, I mean, it drives you nuts, okay? I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. It's not boring, but it's enormously frustrating. But because of that, my attitude is different than, I would say, most members. What do you think is the number one motivating factor of most members of Congress? It's not mine. I'd rather not be there. And so when you have that attitude, I mean, it doesn't, you're going to speak the truth as best as you can articulate it. But no, I have no further aspirations. I mean, I can't imagine anybody wanting to be president, quite honestly. I was telling James and Jim earlier, I've got one portrait in my office of George Washington, primarily because he didn't want to be president. And as a result of that, he set the unbelievable example when they would have crowned him king to say, no, I'm going to serve for 2 terms, and then we're going to have a peaceful transition. And that set the stage for 240 plus years of a marvel that we call America. So, but I appreciate the comment.
Senator Johnson, Tom Moser from the Free State of Texas. The question is, the Democrats have as a nucleus of their campaign against carbon dioxide, which is against fossil fuels, which is against cheap energy, which is against the economy. So my question is, why doesn't the Republicans take on that challenge and say climate change is false, it's not true, and carbon dioxide is good?
So, yeah, I say those things. I mean, personally, I think carbon dioxide is plant food, isn't it? So if you like a green planet, you gotta like carbon dioxide. What does happen is, and I hear that question all the time, why don't you guys say, why don't you make this point? I mean, the truth is we do. But remember what we're up against. We're up against an education system that's indoctrinating our children. We're up against a news media that is a bunch of radical leftists. Okay, we got talk radio. We've got a couple publications. We've got some brilliant thinkers that write columns, that type of thing. But again, the bulk of the media, the bulk of the education system are leftists. And so the things they cover about me is what they can ridicule me about. Okay? So they don't, if I say something brilliant, they're not going to cover that. If I'm going to say something that makes a really good point that's going to nuke their viewpoint, they're not going to cover that. So we always get criticized for just watching Fox News or whatever. Well, what else are we going to watch? So CNN, MSNBC, I mean, that's too painful. But no, listen, we can always be better communicators. There's no doubt about it. I've been pushing since I got there, because I'm a business guy, as a strategy. Part of the problem is we don't have the most effective leadership. We just don't.
Senator Johnson, Terry Hill, I've been to a number of hearings you've held on the grid. Would you comment on the vulnerability of the U.S. grid? Thanks.
Highly vulnerable from my standpoint. One of my enormous frustrations is when I became chairman of Homeland Security, I was visited by, is it Cooperman? Hank Cooperman? Whatever. Anyway, the two gentlemen brought me a book about EMP. I'd heard of it, but I wasn't overly concerned about it. I just didn't understand the full threat it represents. So once I was educated on it, I started holding hearings. It took me a couple of years just to pass a bill, because the argument was, do we need a strategy or do you need a plan to deal with EMP? Again, that's how nonsense this is. We just passed a $1 trillion plus infrastructure bill. I was talking during that process, tried to offer an amendment to set some dollars aside to buy these large power transformers. Which, by the way, if we get hit by an EMP, which is high altitude nuclear blast, okay, or even a GMD, we missed one by a couple days in 2012. The Carrington effect fried telegraph wires. Can you imagine what a really massive solar storm, a GMP would do to, or GMD would do to our electronics right now? So one of the things to do is fry these large power transformers, which we can't replace. Not anytime soon, and if you shut down all of our power, you won't be able to. That's where you get these books talking about 99% of the population be wiped out in a massive EMP. So the solution would be, well, let's buy some of those things, put them on site, so if something like that were happening, we could hook it into our electrical grid. You think we did any? Now part of the problem is I cannot get, because I'm not an electrical engineer, I've never been able to get from the people that are scaring me about this, well, what's the solution? We've talked about capacitors, we've talked about these large power transformers. Well, how many do we need? Where do we need to locate them? So nobody's taking it seriously. Drives me nuts. But no, I think our electrical grid is highly vulnerable. We're making it more vulnerable with all the green energy crap. I was just talking to somebody from Texas, about 50%. That's like Chip Roy was telling me, 50% of the Texas electrical grid is going to be powered by wind and solar. And this is after they literally missed a catastrophic event by a few hours or whatever. They were able to get it back online before it would have been offline for a lot longer because of very cold temperature. Again, it's insane what we're doing. It's insane that you have somebody actually win the presidency, say that he's going to end fossil fuels. What do you say, in 10 years? How are you going to do that without completely impoverishing our country? Again, this is lunacy. It's crazy, but the mainstream media makes it all normal. And so at least, around half, if not more, of our fellow citizens are buying this crap. It's a real problem. That's why I say it's up to us. It's got to be person to person. We've got to educate everybody we know about the lunacy and the destructiveness of the radical left.
We've been biased on this side of the room. Anyone over here? Just so Scott has something to do over here with this microphone? Anyone? Oh, okay, great. We'll take one right here.
Senator Johnson, I'm Dr. Roy Eapen. I'm a doctor from Canada. And one of the things that I've noticed during this whole pandemic in your country and mine is the emergency powers used by the federal and state and provincial governments. Is there any way to limit that so that you need a 2/3 supermajority to invoke emergency powers? Because without those emergency powers, we would have been in a much better shape than we are.
There's a way, sure. Are we going to get it done? There's a very thoughtful presentation put together by somebody named Catherine Watt. She's a legal assistant, but she's just gone into the history of all the laws that were passed that just layered one on top of each other that have given the president, and particularly the Secretary of HHS, all this enormous authority. The vaccines, they weren't purchased through the normal route, through HHS. They were purchased through Defense Department under an other transactional authority. So they were able to legally bypass all this stuff. Of course, there's no legal liability either. So there's a way, but the only way we're going to be able to change this is through exposure to the truth and get more and more of our fellow citizens understanding what's happened. Somebody earlier said there's a lot of scientists in the room. One of the enormous tragedies of the whole pandemic was just the corruption of medical journals, with the Surgisphere, the studies had to be retracted out of New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet. Fauci, federal grants, advertising, all that is corrupted. The media has corrupted our medical research. I would say climate change has corrupted scientific research, right? It's like when you're dependent on a grant from the government, and the government wants a certain answer, you're going to give them that answer. That's just obvious. It's obvious. So we've got to completely relook at these agencies, at this federal largesse, federal grant making. I don't think the FDA and the CDC are really recoverable. I think you've got to start those things from the ground up. Give the FDA the authority to ensure safety. Be monitoring the manufactured drugs. They're not doing that. Most of these drugs coming in from overseas, they're not over there in those plants. I've written a letter on the lot-to-lot variation. 80% of the adverse events of the serious ones came from 1% of the lots. I come from manufacturing. That is called a process out of control. And we don't even talk about it. I got no response other than the FDA say, oh, we didn't see that it's out of control. The CDC is an organization that should be tasked with gathering information so they can disseminate it to doctors and the public. They didn't gather the information we needed, or if they did, they're not giving it to us in an honest, transparent way. So again, there's corruption in the agencies, there's corruption, again, the capture by Big Pharma. There's a lot to fix right now, but it all starts with uncovering and then exposing the truth, which is not easy to do. Quick little example. You're probably familiar with the emails between Fauci and his basic cover-up of his funding of the Wuhan lab. There are 4,000 pages. My staff looked at them. Now, they're all heavily redacted. FOIA requests, the agencies can really redact. So to the point of absurdity, where you get pages that are completely black. So we went in there and we identified 400 pages that we wanted to look at without redactions. So we have to fight with HHS. Fortunately, my chairman, John Ossoff, agreed with us to look at that. Now, they didn't give us the pages. They allowed us to read 50 pages at a time in a reading room. Take notes, no copies, right? So we've gone through the 400 pages. We've gone through 350 of them. We're down to the last 50. They will not give us those last 50 pages unredacted. So you know where all the incriminating evidence is. And I'm hoping the House, Lauren, make sure the House subpoenas those 50 pages first, okay?
Thank you. Senator, we appreciate you being a very forthright conservative voice in a very competitive state like Wisconsin. My question is this. With the Republicans being in a minority in the Senate and with Biden having another 2 years, or the Democratic administration having another 2 years in the White House, is there any way we're going to be able to move the ball forward on greater energy exploration, or is this thing on the shelf till 2025?
One of our big problems is Congress has yeah, I could just end right there, right? Go home. You're right. I'm not a fan, by the way, so I didn't want to do it. Anyway, one of our big problems is Congress has willingly granted the executive branch its constitutional authority in so many areas. And so, all to exonerate themselves from any kind of accountability. I mean, they'll write the bill. They're not laws anymore, they're frameworks to have all the blanks filled in by the executive branch. So they're given a pretty name like Patient Protection Affordable Care Act or the Inflation Reduction Act, doesn't the exact opposite. But then they give the president all that authority. So and by the way, presidents are happy to accept that authority. So, what I'm counting on in this Congress is, and we're working with the conservatives in the House and want to support them. But let's just quick talk about $31.5 trillion worth of debt, okay? In order to move the ball forward, we're not going to get the result conservatives want, but to move the ball forward, we need to pass a debt ceiling increase, and most of us have never voted for one, but we need to be willing to, if when we pass that, we attach to it fiscal controls. I laid out in a Wall Street Journal article the day after I got reelected 4 ideas: Preventing Government Shutdown Act, the No Default Act, or the Full Faith and Credit, the REINS Act, Reins and Regulation, and then one I really like is Reduce the Size of the Federal Government through Attrition Act. So I'll take any and all of those attached to a debt ceiling, and then I'd vote and I'd support House members voting for that debt ceiling increase as long as we're attaching some long-term controls that give us greater leverage in these funding fights. But it's crucial as a first step that the House passes an increase in the debt ceiling with those controls. Maybe, I'm happy to spending cuts, whatever they can do, with 218 Republican votes. If they can't do that, it's going to be a compromise of the Democrats, and we won't get what, we won't even take that first step in better fiscal controls. So again, there are ways of doing this. It's going to be a tough slog. There's nothing easy about it. But so much of the blame does reside with Congresses that just tell the president, you take all the power, and then we'll just blame you.
Two more, one right here. Yeah, Stan. Oh, he wants over there. Oh. All right. Yeah, Stan Goldenberg, my MA from the moderately free state of Florida. There's no problems. But first of all, I encourage people, I avoid ever saying climate change is not real. That terminology is critical. Climate change is very real. The climate's always changing. Man-made climate change, that's the issue. But anyway, so enjoyed your talk. I have to go back and listen to it again. But I'm especially interested in the COVID stuff. I spent a lot of time. I was maligned at work. I'm a federal employee for daring to say anything that differed with CDC guidance. But I'm especially interested in you talking about making people accountable for the kind of treatment people got. I mean, I know people personally who got very sick or died because they were withheld from certain treatments. And is there any way to go after? It just seems like an almost impossible thing.
Well, again, this first step is exposing the truth, which is why I held in January 2020 a 5-hour event in the Kennedy Room in the Russell Building. It was called COVID-19: A Second Opinion. And I assembled, the McCullochs, the Malones, the Harvey Rishes, the eminent experts that I've been in contact with for well over a year, as well as vaccine injured. We followed that up on December 7th of last year with an event that I called, vaccines, what they are, how they work, or what they're doing in the cell, and how they can cause injury. So I think the way we get greater public awareness, and I'm trying not to use the vaccine injured, okay? I have nothing but the sincerest desire to help them, but they want to be using this way to make the American public aware of what's happening and make them aware that the vaccines are not as safe or as effective as we were told or as we all hoped and prayed they would be, okay? So again, it's about getting the truth out. But when you take a look at what the VAERS are saying, when you take a look at, there's a group called goodsciencing.org that's tracking all the athletes that have collapsed on the field. There are over 1,600 over the last 2 years. I think 1,148 have died. That compares with, on average per year, about 26 to 60 in International Olympic Committee studies on this stuff. This is not normal. We take a look at all of these actresses and actors and famous people and young people that are just going to bed and they wake up dead. No, there's nothing funny about it. It's tragic. But you also notice whenever you read those accounts, they never talk about the vaccine status. They never talk about, we just got boosted 2 weeks ago. They just don't want to know. And we're not doing autopsies. We ought to be autopsying anybody who just dies suddenly. We need to get to the bottom of this. FAA. They are ignoring the pilot instances. I talked to Bob Snow, American Airlines pilot, marathon runner, no heart disease. His heart stops 6 minutes after landing. Now, part of the problem with myocarditis is it screws up the electrical conduction in your heart. So an adrenaline rush, the theory is, it could literally cause heart arrest. Is that what's happening? I don't know for sure. And I'll tell you who else doesn't know, the federal agencies, because they're not even talking to the guy. American Airlines didn't talk to him. They're ignoring the problem. But we also have the other problem too, when the Buffalo Bills player collapsed, right? Now, again, I'm connected to these doctors. They were going to offer, and I'm connected to the players. Ken Rutgers, that's how I got connected. He's a former Green Bay Packer player. That's how I got connected to the vaccine injured. His wife was injured. But so we went, John Stockton, we went to the Players Association and offered them cardiologists to do screening tests. They weren't interested. They don't want to know. Players, they'd rather take the risk. They don't want to give up a multi-million-dollar per year career. Pilots, they don't want to be grounded. They've got to provide for the families. So it's got to be the FAA, and of course, they're in a state of denial. And I would say when it comes to the pandemic, our biggest roadblock is just a basic and very understandable human tendency. Nobody wants to admit they're wrong. People who are vaccinated, they don't want to believe that they were maybe wrong to do it. They don't want to believe that maybe there's a ticking time bomb there. By the way, I'm hoping and praying I've got 2 kids got the vaccine. They wouldn't listen to me. I'm hoping the body clears it out and the people who are vaccine injured are the unfortunate few. I'm hoping and praying that's true. But we can't, hope and prayer is not a strategy. We need real information, and our government's not providing it to us. And the news media is censoring what real information is out there.
We have time for just one last question right here.
My name is Donna Jackson. I'm the Director of Membership Development for Project 21 Black Leadership Network. Like you, I have a background in finance and accounting. I worked for Ernst & Young. I was Deputy Controller. Can you please get you and your colleagues to investigate all of this environmental justice money? It is not going into any black communities. I can get 50 black people on the phone right now, and none of them are prioritizing climate change policies. And the most egregious thing is they're using climate change policies to actually block black progress. Please, some oversight. It's going to climate change activists that actually bully black people if they stand up and say something about it, killing black jobs. That's the
So I certainly don't disagree with you. During the campaign, again, I was anticipating we get the majority. I'd be chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which would give me all kinds of power. Again, I've got all the oversight letters to act as a foundation for investigations, but same time, I'd also say, if we do win, if I do become chairman, I will be like a mosquito in a nudist colony, a very target-rich environment. So what you really do need to do is go to right now, the committee chair in the House of the committee that has jurisdiction over that spending and make that appeal. And you've got Lauren right here, and she can go talk to, again, I'm not sure which committee it would be. Quite honestly, in the Senate, I'm not sure which committee that would be, but that is the way it works. And I've always defended people come in and talk to members of Congress. I never called them lobbyists. I said, don't refer yourself to lobbyists. There's nothing wrong with lobbying. What you're doing is you're educating. We're talking about a $6 trillion plus entity, the largest financial entity in the world. Okay? And by the way, nobody even knows how much we spend. When we're going over the omnibus, I was asking my colleagues, I was asking members of the press, you know how much we spent last year? None of them knew, because we never talk about it. Think about it, the largest financial entity in the world, and nobody knows how much it spends. But that's the task. So there's no member of Congress, there's no staff member of a member of Congress that can even begin to understand all the complexity of the federal government. That's why we need citizens like you to come into Washington, D.C., or go talk to your member of Congress in your district and educate them. And let them know, you just educated me, you just educated Lauren in terms of this issue, and I'm sure Lauren will follow up on the House, and I'll certainly ask my staff about it as well. But again, I'm asking all of you, my final point. If you're involved, stay involved. If you're not involved enough, get more involved. Get more involved. This is up to us, we the people. God bless all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Heartland Institute President James Taylor.
Wow. Thank you, Senator Johnson. How about another round of applause? Senator Johnson, thank you especially for fighting the nonsense and the ever-changing stories and lies we've been fed by our federal government.
what was it? First of all, it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Then it was social distancing will stop the spread. Then it was if we shut down all the small businesses and churches but leave the big boxes and the liquor stores open, that'll end COVID. Then it was if you get the vaccine, it's a dead end for COVID, that'll take care of it. Then it was there are no side effects whatsoever. And by Senator Johnson, many of us speak that truth among our friends. Senator Johnson goes out and says it publicly, and so many people are afraid to do so, and for good reason. You get clubbed over the head by it every day by the media if you say that. But Senator Johnson has had the courage and the honesty and the integrity to stand up. Thank you again so much for doing that. By the way, how cool is it that we have a United States Senator that is following and quoting Christopher Monckton? And no, Lord Monckton, that does not mean we wish to rejoin the British Empire. Leading up to the elections last year, I remember the speculation because Senator Johnson had made it clear that, look, I've done my service, I want to get back to my life. And it made many of us worried. And I guess out of selfishness, myself included, I'm thinking, come on, can you sacrifice just 6 more years? Because whether a Democrat or a Republican was going to win, who was going to fill that seat and do for the American people what Senator Johnson has done? Who's going to fight for freedom as strongly and as effectively as Senator Johnson? I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. The odds would have been slim. And I'll tell you, at the Heartland Institute and elsewhere, and in the Taylor household, we rejoiced when we heard that news, and we rejoiced when you were reelected. So, on to another note. Oh, by the way, just one other note. One Senator Ron Johnson is worth 6 of just about anybody else in the U.S. Senate. Isn't that true? So, changing gears. Last night, early during Alex Epstein's talk, I'm sitting at a table over on the side, and Sterling Burnett leans over and says, "Hey, James, isn't that Congresswoman Boebert in the back?" So I turn and I look and I say, wow. Now, Congresswoman Boebert is scheduled to speak Saturday at lunch, and here it is Friday evening, and she's in the back of the room, and she's standing by herself. And I'm thinking, okay, probably her handlers, her entourage will be here in just a moment, and probably she's here to check out the stage and make sure she knows the setup for tomorrow. She'll duck in and duck out. Because let's face it, when I've been at events where we have members of Congress speaking, usually they arrive about 10 minutes before their talk, they leave right afterwards, and that is not at all an indictment on them, because let's face it, you are very busy if you're in the Senate or the House. Your time is in great demand. Not only are you working day and night in Washington, D.C., when you're out of Washington, D.C., still attending to business, and you're trying to keep up with family, and you're trying to keep up with friends, and you're giving of your time to go to events like these. I mean, of course, that's what's going to happen out of necessity. And at the Heartland Institute and everywhere else, we're grateful when that happens. So that's what the expectation is. So I decided to go to the back and welcome Congresswoman Boebert and see if there's anything that she needs. And she says, "Oh, no, it's just me, and I'm here to watch Alex Epstein tonight." I'm thinking, my goodness, I mean, how refreshing, how cool. Here she is wanting to watch Alex Epstein, not just getting a briefing, not just being told this is how you want to vote on topics like energy policy, environment policy, climate policy, but learning in depth. That just blew me away. And I went over to my seat, and she goes and sits in the back at just some random table. Gregory Wrightstone was lucky enough. I saw she was sitting next to him. But she just grabs a seat and watches the event. So I go to my table and I text Jim Lakely, and I say, "Jim, so after Alex's talk, recognize Congresswoman Boebert. Let people know she's in the back of the room." And Jim does so. And Lauren Boebert gets up and walks across the room, finds Jim, and thanks him just for that mention. I mean, that just tells you something about the person. Not just, hey, I'm here, of course you recognize me, but for her to make that effort. And it meant a lot to Jim, it meant a lot to me. So anyway, so the Congresswoman then, near the end of Alex Epstein's talk, is going to leave, and I think, okay, we definitely thank her for being here, and realizing that her time is in great demand, nevertheless say, hey, many of us each evening here, we're getting together in the bar in the lobby. Some of us get together in the courtyard out back across from Benihana's. It'd be great if, we'd love to have you join us and just say hello if you get a chance. And she said, oh yes, I'll certainly try to, but of course you know what that means, because she's really busy, it's just a nice thing to say. And now when I said that we're going to meet in the courtyard across from Benihana's, I didn't mention that we'd be smoking cigars. I didn't want to scare her off. So, Alex Epstein finishes his talk, people are gathering in the lobby bar. About 15 of us are smoking the daylights out of cigars in the courtyard out back. It's like a Cheech and Chong movie. You walk into it, there's just the cigar smoke overwhelming everything. We're about an hour into this, and frivolity, and just having a great time, and I look up, and what do I see but Jim Lakely escorting Congresswoman Lauren Boebert to our Cheech and Chong set. And I'm thinking, I really should have mentioned the cigars before the courtyard, because this could get bad. I mean, worst case scenario, she comes outside, oh my gosh, look, I can't handle this, I gotta go. Best case scenario, a very polite, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, which is what we would hope for in a best case scenario anyway, lift our spirits and hey, I gotta go. But she has to deal with the cigar smoke, it's a little awkward. So Jim comes outside with Congresswoman Boebert. I said, thank you so much for coming. And by the way, does the cigar smoke bother you? We can put these out. And remember that point I made about maybe getting 5 or 10 minutes of a hello and lifting everyone's spirits? No, that didn't happen. The cigar smoke, that didn't happen. What happened was when I said, we can put these out, she says, oh, no, by all means. And now pushing my luck, I said, well, would you like one? So the 5 or 10 minutes didn't happen because Congresswoman Boebert, as busy as she is, as much as she's attending, not just to work, to family and friends, she hangs out with us for about 2 hours, taking in the Cheech and Chong set, and it was just a wonderful time and a wonderful giving of herself. And by the way, it wasn't just, hey, I'm gonna say hello to everybody. Keeping in mind, none of us are in her district, none of us are big donors, but just the person that she is. For those of you who are lucky enough to smoke cigars and therefore were with us last night, it was like being with a lifelong friend and spending a couple hours talking about family, talking about faith, talking about just personal things we go through. I feel like I've known Congresswoman Boebert all my life. And by the way, it wasn't just speakers, it was anybody who was there. Introducing Congresswoman Boebert to Mark Morano. You could see her eyes light up because she knows who Mark Morano is. She follows his work. She follows the issue. Introducing her to Willie Soon, Dr. Willie Soon. Again, yes, I know your work. How amazing is it? Senator Johnson, who knows Christopher Monckton's work, Congresswoman Boebert, who knows Mark Morano's work, Willie Soon's work, and then takes the time just to, as a friend, get to know and share of her time. Thank you so much for that last night. But it's more than just being a kind-hearted person that makes for a good policymaker. I mean, Jimmy Carter, by all accounts, was kind-hearted and had a great personality. Look what happened to America as a result. For Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, it goes far beyond just being a truly wonderful, sincere, kind-hearted person. She is one of the greatest champions of freedom that we have in Washington, D.C. I have loved my 20-plus years in public policy with the Heartland Institute. There are very few things that have gotten me discouraged or down, but one of the things it does is oftentimes we will go into state legislatures or Congress and meet with our policymakers or their staff, and so many of them, even those that have an R hanging next to their name and are in deep red states, and talk a very good game on the campaign trail. When it comes time to important issues like standing up for online free speech against big tech censorship, when it comes to standing up against the government emergency powers that they declare to impose their COVID restrictions on us, a myriad of issues, including energy policy, climate policy, when they are not on the campaign trail, when there are not spotlights on them, you can't count on them. Oftentimes they work to undermine what their conservative voters believe in so hard. And that really is the easiest thing to do sometimes. In Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, that does not happen. We witnessed just here in the past couple of months her risking her status among her friends, among her colleagues on the Capitol. She knew that she would get clubbed over the head by the media, but she stood up for what she believed in. And what she believes in time and time again is what we believe in. We believe in freedom. We believe in conservative values. It's because of people like Congresswoman Lauren Boebert that we're not completely sold out in the halls of Congress. Thank you, Congressman Boebert. I've already spoken too long because you're here to watch, see, listen to Congresswoman Boebert, not me. So without further ado, I present to you, it's my great honor to welcome Congresswoman Lauren Boebert.
To use a handheld mic because I am not full grown. They offered me a step stool back here, but I saw the handhelds and said, let's just do this. I do want to start off, it was very wonderful to hear Senator Ron Johnson and then even a lot of the questions that were asked in the audience. And I do want to say, I agree with the gentleman who said we need to stop saying climate change isn't real. Climate change is absolutely real. It happens 4 times every year. And we're not surprised by it. In Colorado, sometimes it happens 4 times in a day. But we are battling radical leftists right now. And I'm so glad that the senator highlighted that to each and every one of you. You know what we are up against, but you have the truth. You have the tools to combat the lies. The light, the revelation that you have, it shines in the darkness, and it exposes everything that is being hidden, that is deceiving Americans, and that is ultimately destroying our lives and our children's future. Just like the senator, I too am here because of freedom. I cherish freedom. I cherish it because of our country. Is that a picture of me smoking a cigar? What is this? That's adorable. I was trying to be really inspiring here. Praise the Lord. Okay. My aunt and uncle are in the audience. Please close your eyes and your ears. Your precious niece was behaving. I had a soda water. But we are here to expose the radical left. We are here because of freedom. I don't love freedom simply because of my country, simply because of the Constitution, but foundationally, I love freedom because Jesus was sent to set me free. There's a deep-rooted passion for liberty, and that's what America was birthed from. That's why we have the Constitution. We had founding fathers that were inspired by faith. They were bold because the truth lived on the inside of them. And they were not ashamed to speak that truth. In fact, even when going through the Declaration of Independence and how those articles were drafted, you can see faith and scripture all throughout that process. Our founding fathers, they declared independence before they were free. Scripture says to declare a thing and it shall be established. And then if you go to Habakkuk 2, it says, write out the vision and make it plain. And that's what they did. They wrote out their declaration. And then, in the New Testament, it talks about calling things that be not as though they were. And that when you ask for something, when you pray for something, believe that you receive it. Well, what did our founding fathers do? They celebrated their freedom before they even went into battle. They celebrated that independence as though it already belonged to them. But then they knew that the work was theirs to do. The battle was the Lord's, but the work was theirs to do. So that's when they swore to one another their sacred honor and their lives, and went out and obtained the thing that they believed in so greatly. That is why we are here, because we have that spirit of freedom on the inside of us. And there are so many people who want to take that away. Now, I enjoy Senator Ron Johnson's presence here, but also in Washington, D.C. He's one of the senators that we welcome into our House Freedom Caucus gatherings. We welcome him at the Conservative Partnership Institute because we know that he has a foundation of truth and that he is here for the right reasons, not to just be another politician. In fact, I think that he would agree with me that we're here because we can't stand politicians. People say one thing on a campaign trail. They make promises, and then they get to where we send them, and they govern a completely different way. They overregulate, they overtax, they overspend, they make excuses, they appease the left in their radical extremism because the narrative that the left has created, well, like you said, they'll get beat over the head with a club if they go against it. And so they make excuses, and they want to sit back idly by and just get reelected. In the first week of the 118th Congress this year, my friends and I proved that we aren't just looking towards the next reelection. We have heard from you, we have heard from our constituents that Congress is broken. We've heard from the senator today that there is profound dysfunction in Congress. And there are so many things that we can do right there in the simple rules package to address that. We don't have to pass legislation through the House, through the Senate, have the president sign it. No, it's our House. We are a self-governing majority rule body. And so we demanded that changes be made to the way we operate each and every day in Congress. And it took a few days to get it right, but I think it was worth it. Now, some of the concessions that we were able to get through this speaker battle are already working today. We are already debating amendments on the House floor, something that hasn't happened in about 10 years. Every member of Congress can offer an amendment that is germane to a piece of legislation on the House floor and debate that amendment and get a vote on it. This has empowered each and every individual member of Congress, instead of having consolidated power in just a select few in the House. We were able to get single subject legislation. We have 47 state legislatures that have single subject legislation. I think we need to do it at a federal level too. It's amazing that the amendments have to be germane to that single subject. There were so many bills that I voted against in the last Congress simply because it was a con. It was titled one way, but then it was loaded with a bunch of garbage that had nothing to do with the subject of the bill. Take the infrastructure bill that you heard some of today. $1.2 trillion, and only 9% of that $1.2 trillion went towards anything infrastructure related. It's a complete con. But that's what the left does with everything. They title it something amazing. How could you ever vote against this? Hoping that you will never actually open it up and see what's inside. They have the 30 by 30 program, the 30 by 30 initiative. They want to retitle this, or maybe they have retitled it, America the Beautiful. Well, doesn't that sound great? Who would ever vote against or be against or advocate against the America the Beautiful initiative? I do think that the name is kind of fitting because it is very telling of what they want to do. We know that they want 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030. They're actually increasing it. They want 50% of the land and water by 2050. And of course, they're going to want even more than that. So America the Beautiful is pretty fitting because they do want all of your land and water from sea to shining sea. But also in these concessions, we were able to get 72 hours to actually read a bill. Now, we had a 72-hour rule before, but it was something that was abused because 72 hours meant if you introduce a piece of legislation at 11:59 p.m. and then 2 days later at 12:01 a.m., well, hey, that's your 72 hours right there. We could go ahead and vote on this bill. No, members of Congress need to have time to read and understand what we were actually voted on, instead of being handed multi-thousand-page bills that spend trillions of dollars and you have to pass it to find out what's in it. Will we put a stop to that? We also demanded regular order. Legislation has to go through committees of jurisdiction so it can have a debate, amendments, markup, and then go to the House floor for a vote. Often Nancy Pelosi would bypass committees of jurisdiction, so the members who were supposed to be experts on these topics had no say in them in committee. Now, I served on the Budget Committee. You could ask my husband, I'm not an expert on budget. Actually, when I went home and told him I was appointed to the Budget Committee, he said, oh, dear Lord, what have they done? But we had 2 budget reconciliations where we had jurisdiction over them. And Nancy Pelosi would bypass the Budget Committee and send the legislation straight to the House floor for a vote. So we demanded that we actually follow out this process. We want 12 individual appropriations bills where we will be able to address inflation, government spending, and defund every woke program that is currently in our federal government, piece by piece. Now, these 12 individual appropriations bills are important because they put an end to the horrible omnibus bills that are forced on us right before Christmas, in the middle of the night, 24 hours to vote on it, it's 4,000 pages, spends trillions of dollars. We put a stop to that. And the best part is my colleagues in the Senate, well, we've empowered the Republicans who are in the minority because the Senate has to comply with our House rules with legislation. They have to send us single subject legislation, amendments that are germane. We need 72 hours to read a bill, 12 individual appropriations requests, or bills, and no omnibus bills. Now, a lot of people thought that this was chaos, that this was dysfunction. I'm a mom of 4 boys. I know chaos, I know dysfunction. This was anything but that. In fact, this was the most effective I have seen Congress operate since I've been there. We had 434 members of Congress together in the House chambers, something I had not seen before the speaker's race. We were debating the issue at hand. We were engaging in conversation with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Relationships were created, relationships were strengthened, and at the end of this, the Republican Party came out of it more united and stronger than ever. I believe that what we did even empowered Speaker McCarthy to do a fantastic job, and he has every ability to be an amazing speaker because of the concessions that we were able to receive in this. Now, I know we're here to talk about energy, to talk about climate. I'm proud to serve on the Natural Resources Committee, but before I get into that, I do also serve on the Oversight and Accountability Committee. I've left the Budget Committee. And it's amazing to be a part of a committee where we can hold the federal government accountable. We were able in the concessions in our speakers race to even create some select committees, like the weaponization of the federal government, Special Select Committee. This is so important right now because your federal government has been weaponized against you. And we have the gavels in the House to have this oversight, to issue subpoenas. Our work, it's really cut out for us. They don't have the gavel in the Senate. So all of the oversight, all of these investigations, and all of the subpoena power is on our shoulders. And we have a lot to do. There is going to be so much exposure in the next 2 years. And I don't want any of these committees who are investigating what's going on to be a dog and pony show like Trey Gowdy and Benghazi. I want true accountability. I want criminal referrals issued, and I want people to pay for what they have done to American citizens. Now, this is my second term serving on the Natural Resources Committee. They decided to put sweet little AOC right across the dais from me. So that's going to be fun. But you know, she should be able to kind of keep it down about her Green New Deal because that's basically what the Inflation Reduction Act was. I was actually wrong telling my constituents this isn't the Inflation Reduction Act, it's the Inflation Expansion Act. But it's really the Green New Deal. We have hundreds of billions of dollars going towards Green New Deal subsidies and programs. This is the Green New Deal with a different title. So I'm happy to have these conversations in the committee and actually have real hearings. In the last Congress, we spent 2 whole days debating Carol Baskin's big cat bill. While energy prices are skyrocketing, electricity rates 13% higher than they were. Gas is over 60% higher at the time. Record inflation, and we're debating tigers. This is Congress, not Joe Exotic. But the adults are back in charge in the House of Representatives, and in the Natural Resources Committee, we are going after Joe Biden's war on American energy. Now, part of my story, my husband works in the oil and gas industry. He's drilled for natural gas for 20 years now. I worked in the oil and gas industry. I was a pipeliner. I located pipe. I did cathodic protection, installing anodes, protecting the pipe from corroding, and all of that with a GED. The American dream, folks. But I understand how great American energy is. I understand how we are the most regulated energy. We have the most regulated energy production in the entire world. Our oil is 42% cleaner than Russia's, or natural gas. This is so important for not just our country, but for our allies across the world. If you want to prevent what's happening in Ukraine, will allow us to unleash our full energy potential and export freedom across the globe. On day one, Joe Biden, he canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, killed thousands of jobs. This would have created 83,000 jobs, exporting oil from Canada to the United States. He issued moratoriums, he put bans on fracking. In Colorado, we are feeling this. Everywhere I go, everyone talks about affordable housing. Will the federal government do something about affordable housing? No one can afford to live here, and we can't get the jobs that we need, and we can't get the work done. We don't have plow drivers for I-70, and we have records amounts of crashes every time that it snows because we're supposed to have 11 plows out and we have one. But no one can afford to live here. Can the federal government do something? Yes. Bring the good-paying jobs back, because our communities in Colorado have been regulated into poverty, pushing oil and gas out, closing down our coal plants. Colorado has arguably the cleanest coal in the world, and they are completely attacking it and wanting to subsidize wind and solar to replace it, and it will never produce the amount of energy that our coal does. Good thing Joe Biden says oil has at least 10 years left. It's good news. This is an attack on our intelligence. This is an attack on our work, on what we can produce. This is what makes us successful, our resources that we are able to produce and export, utilize. Joe Biden drained our strategic petroleum reserves in the name of an election. That's an absolute disgrace. But House Republicans are on the ball, and we've already passed legislation to say no executive can ever drain our strategic petroleum reserves again when there is no emergency. An election is not an emergency. Joe Biden has locked up so much of our land and so much of our country's resources with a stroke of a pen. He couldn't get this passed through Congress. In fact, I was there last year when the Senate couldn't even pass a kidney stone. So Joe Biden gets his stacks of bills, stacks of executive orders, and signs them when he can find his pen. But it's destroying so much, so many of our capabilities. And this is what the left always does. The left will create a crisis from their bad policies, and then they'll address the symptoms of that crisis at your expense, the taxpayer, and then they claim victory. But it's their policies that are creating all of these crises that we need to address. There are so many reasonable things that we can do when it comes to our energy, when it comes to our environment. None of us want dirty air, polluted air, dirty water. No, we want clean air, clean water, healthy forests. We hear the left clamoring about carbon all the time. Well, in the West, there are 6 billion standing dead trees. The left won't let us harvest them. They're all creating a massive tinderbox waiting to ignite. In 2020, in my district, which is about half the state of Colorado, we had 3 of the largest wildfires on record. Now, just one of those catastrophic wildfires emits more carbon emissions in a few short days than every vehicle running in the state of Colorado 24/7 for an entire year. If you're serious about carbon emissions, allow us to manage our forests. Healthy forests means healthy watersheds. So many of us on the West have been impacted by severe drought. Colorado doesn't have a water problem. We have an allocation problem. We have unhealthy forests. We can increase even our watershed. But they want to lock all of it up. I battled Congresswoman Diana DeGette and Congressman Joe Neguse many times on the House floor in the last Congress for legislation that they've been trying to get passed for 10, 15 years. Joe Neguse has the CORE Act, wants to lock up over 500,000 acres in my district, designate it wilderness, so we are unable to manage it. Diana DeGette, same thing. Together, it's about 700,000 acres in my district that they want to lock up, about 1,000 miles of river in my district that they want to designate wild and scenic. Now, how many of you are familiar with the city of Denver? Great, many of you. So in Denver, we have the 16th Street Mall. Diana DeGette represents Denver. If you've been down there, the 16th Street Mall isn't really the safest place. It's not like a double-gated community. But I told her, I said, listen, how about instead of locking up our land in my district and our river, how about you focus on yours before I introduce legislation to designate the 16th Street Mall as wild and scenic? It is pretty wild down there. Different type of wilderness. But with all of this said, we want to be good stewards of our land, and we are good stewards of our land. Our farmers, our ranchers, who care for the land that they are producing from, they don't want that to be toxic. They don't want that to be unhealthy. They want to provide a good and a service for their neighbors, for our country, for others around the world. And the left has a direct attack on that. In everything that they do, it's backwards, and the American people are suffering because of their policies. Whether it's gas prices being $2.39 on day one of Joe Biden's presidency, or today the national average being $3.40 a gallon. In my district, people are paying $30 to $40 more per tank per gas. I had a man who was oddly not a fan because he was wearing a freedom hat, but I tried to talk to him. He recognized me. Nope, nothing to do with me. Saw him in the airport on my way here. I'm like, okay, I get it. But then he came up to me after the flight was over, and he said, hey, sorry about that earlier. Can you just do something about the energy prices and the gas prices? I'm working on it, buddy. Can you please start voting for different people? It threw me off a little, you know, freedom hat, not a mask. It was just threw me off. But even LendingTree, I looked this up, and LendingTree took a survey, and they found that 33% of Americans' households in the last year said that they had foregone basic expenses just to afford their energy bill. This is not right. It's not necessary, and it's by design. It's all of the policies that they have implemented that we are working so hard to fight against, and we finally have a leg up in the House. I hope we can get some senators to work with us to pass more legislation out of the Senate. Hopefully we can have Biden maybe after a good bowl of applesauce, and he'll want to sign these into law. Feeling kind of frisky. But we are laying the groundwork for what we can accomplish with a Senate majority and by taking the White House back. We're laying it all out there saying Republicans do have a plan. In fact, we have about 222 of them on most subjects. But we are working together to show Americans that there is a way forward, that we don't have to live in poverty and lack, that this is the land of the free because of the brave, that we can have a secure border, that we can be a prosperous country, that we can be, once again, energy independent and pursue energy dominance. There's legislation that I have passed, my American Energy Act, and this helps streamline the drilling permit process. Joe Biden canceled permits and leases. In Colorado, they were already doing that at a state level, but we had the federal lands to lean on until Joe Biden showed up. My bill prevents radical judges from allowing their political preferences to interfere in our critical energy infrastructure. These are all common sense approaches. Every time a Democrat speaks up in the House, they want to say, MAGA Republicans and extremist Republicans and radical Republicans. We just want people to be free, to be able to live their lives and not have overreaching governments stifling everything and choking out all possibilities to live their very best life. I don't think that's very radical. I don't think that's extreme. I think that is the American dream, and that is what we continue to fight for each and every day. It's why I leave my 4 boys and my husband every day to do what I'm doing. I do not want my children to live in a socialist nation. I want them to be able to support their families, to not have government getting in the way of everything. Government is so overgrown, our agencies are so overgrown that they don't even want congressional oversight. Congress created you. Congress funds you. If Congress can't have oversight, then we got a problem. But also, we did get another little concession called the Holman Rule. And the Holman Rule allows us to go after the should-be term-limited bureaucrats individually and target their salaries. Talk about power of the purse. Can you imagine if we would have had that in place and able to use that when Anthony Fauci was doing what he was doing? The highest paid bureaucrat in our federal government, earning more than the President of the United States, to go in and say, hey, buddy, I think it's time for a federal minimum wage for you. But we fought for the ability to do that. So that is something that we can go after. And when these bureaucrats start to see their colleagues being singled out and targeted, well, maybe they'll start shaping up a little bit more. And maybe we should have legislation to term limit bureaucrats. But I want to thank you guys so much. It truly is such an honor to be here. It was great to sit and observe Alex Epstein last night. When it comes to energy and energy policy, he's my muse. He truly is an idol. I've read his books. I've had him in committees to testify on very important topics. And it's just always encouraging and inspiring to see someone who's so passionate about our country, about energy, about reliable and affordable energy. And I'm so grateful to the Heartland Institute and CFAC for what they've done and put this together and bring all of these great minds together for this event this week to encourage you, to uplift you, to empower you, so you can go out and spread all of this. Don't be selfish, don't be greedy, don't keep it all inside. Share it with people because they need to know the truth. They are being lied to everywhere they turn. And just as you heard the senator say, at least half of them are believing it. There has to be truth being spoken. We have to be bold about it. We have the right policies. We have to be the right messengers. We have to carry this out. I'm committed to do that, and I hope that you are as well. I'm more committed to spreading this message than I am to smoking more cigars. You know, I was a little nervous. I'm from Colorado. I was like, I don't know what's in that. You don't just go and pick up a cigar in Colorado. That could be very dangerous, a game you do not want to play. But no, I'm so grateful to so many of you who are here. Thank you so much for having me to speak. There is hope for our country. I believe that America is resilient and that we will come out of this stronger than how we went in, just like the Republican Party in the speaker's race. And even though the left looks really unified, it's just because they're not allowed to have independent thought. But thank you all so much, and it's been a pleasure getting to know so many of you. And I do want to just extend, if I may, an invitation. We're going to have a reception tonight at 5:30? 5:30 to 6:30, and we're in room 1751. And I do want to give a special thank you to Bruce Rosenthal. He's the one who's connected me with this event. So Bruce, you're amazing. You're such a wonderful advocacy for American energy. And so I just thank you for your friendship and your support, and Priscilla, his lovely girlfriend who is with him. And so you are all welcome to attend our reception if you're free. I'll have my books there, My American Life, and you can learn more about me, and we could chat, and we might even have some cigars. So praise the Lord. Thank you all so much.
All right. Well, we're obviously running late, but it was totally worth it. The next two panels begin at 2:30. I'm sure